Today we learn about divs and spans in HTML. Not every element in HTML has a meaning. Some are just containers. For example, div is a block level container and span is an inline container. They basically don't describe what's inside, they just group elements. Think of a classroom. The pupils inside are the elements, they're the actual content. The classroom itself is just a container grouping all those pupils together and separating one class from another. That's what a container like a div does in HTML. It doesn't have meaning by itself, but it groups elements so it can organize or style them as one unit. You can create a div by typing div, then closing a bracket, and you have an opening and a closing tag for a div. And everything inside of this div basically belongs to this div container. We can now, for example, write something inside of the div, like here is some text, and you'll see the text on the website. But this text is inside of a div right now. And we can take a look at this div inside of the inspector, which we can basically open by right-clicking the page and inspect. And those are basically developer tools. So if you basically hover over the body, it highlights basically everything that belongs to the body element. Now you can expand the body and see what is basically inside of the body. And as you can see, we have our div inside of the body right here. And now if we make our website a little bit bigger and we hover over the body, we see that basically the div is our body, so this is the entire body. Now if we hover over the div, it basically highlights the entire div, and as you can see, our div goes from left to right. So it basically takes up the entire available space, so everything from left to right. Now I want to show you a second container element, which is basically the span, and we're going to create it pretty similar to the div. The only difference is basically that the name is span. Now we can also like write something inside of the span, like here is some span text. And now we save our website and this basically reloads our website. So now if we hover over the body, it basically marks everything. So it marks our div and our span. And the reason for this is that our div and our span are basically child elements of our body. So our div and our span are inside of our body. Now we can expand our body. And if we hover over our div, it basically marks our div. And if we hover over our span, it marks our span. As you can see, our div takes up all the available space from left to right. If you see it right here, everything that is blue is basically our div. If we hover over our span, you can basically see that our span takes up the minimal available space. So it just takes up the space that is necessary to display the text. So we could, for example, create a second div element right here and say, here is a second div, and we'll save our website. And as you can see, it will display our second div below our first div. And the reason for this is that our first div takes up all the available space. We create a second div, and the second div takes up all the available space. So it obviously needs to display the second div inside of a new row because there's no space available in the first row. But if we create a second span, for example, by using the span tag again and saying here is a second span, it can display the second span right next to the first span because the first span just takes up the minimal space necessary to display the text. So there's a lot of space available right next to the first span. And basically a div is called a block level element because it is basically displayed as a block that takes up all the available space. And span is basically called an inline element because you can basically display multiple spans in line, in one single line, because they take up the minimal necessary space to display the content inside. Both of them are basically containers, just with a different purpose. And that is all you need to know about divs and spans.